the gun of thugger though, dog.
It's terrible.
Do you think it's sometimes it's not good when we deep like that?
It's terrible. It's not. It's not.
Kodak Black spent a morning on Instagram calling out people for not holding young Thug accountable. Then, a leaked phone call dropped showing that while Thug was sitting in a federal jail cell fighting one of the biggest RICO cases in Georgia history, Kodak had been sliding into Thug's girlfriend's DMs, referencing Thug's incarceration as part of why she should see him. That's the story. Everything else is context. Here's how all of it connects. Young Thug walked out of the YSL trial having survived something that swallowed 28 people whole, years in Fulton County Jail. A RICO indictment that swept up artists, affiliates, and family members. 2 defense attorneys arrested during proceedings. Co-defendants flipping. The longest and most expensive criminal trial in Georgia history. He came out with his label, his freedom, and his ambition still intact. The moment he had air under his feet, he started rebuilding. He hopped on a Twitch stream with Black Boy Max and started talking about who he wanted for YSL. And when he found out Kodak Black had just gone fully independent after ending his deal with Capitol Records, he made his move publicly, posting that if Kodak would do a deal with him, he'd give him whatever he thought he wanted. That's not a negotiation. That's a man with a freshly rebuilt label, flush off his freedom, putting himself on the table completely in front of everyone. Kodak had just tasted something he'd been working toward for years. Real independence. No label overhead, no executive interference, his music on his own terms for the first time. And Thug, knowing all of that, still made the offer, because he needed it. The YSL brand had taken damage that no legal outcome could fully repair. When people hear that name now, they don't just think Jeffrey. They think the RICO indictment. They think leaked jail calls. They think Gunna. Thug needed a big signing to show the world YSL was still alive and still capable of pulling real talent. Kodak said no, and he didn't say it quietly. Instead of a polite decline, he went on Instagram and started calling people out for their silence on young Thug's situation. His specific target was Boosie Badazz, who had built his public persona around calling out artists who cooperated with federal authorities, most visibly when he went after Tekashi 6ix9ine relentlessly. Kodak's argument was simple. If Boosie was the self-appointed voice of hip-hop accountability, where was that same energy for young Thug? That argument had real substance to it. The selective outrage around who gets called out for cooperating versus who gets protected by their fanbase is a genuine contradiction in hip-hop culture. Kodak saw it, named it, and went after the loudest voice in the room. The problem was the receipts that came out while he was doing it. Before we get to that, you need to understand what Boosie's relationship with Kodak actually is. Their beef has layers. Boosie originally criticized Kodak for collaborating with 6ix9ine in hip-hop culture. Working with someone who cooperated with federal prosecutors against his own people is one of the few stigmas that doesn't fade. Kodak got paid $1 million for that feature and took it. Boosie didn't forgive him for it. So Kodak calling out Boosie for being quiet on Thug's situation, while Boosie was still holding a grudge over the 6ix9ine collab, was always going to go sideways. Boosie came back hard. He didn't engage with Kodak's argument about selective accountability at all. He went straight to personal, Kodak's declining career, his drug use, his lifestyle choices. He said he spoke when the bag cleared, and until somebody brought the bag, it wasn't his problem to carry Thug's water. He also accused Kodak of still being salty over old beef. Both of them were landing punches, both of them had points, and both of them were missing the bigger thing sitting right in the middle of it. Because while this was all unfolding, a leaked jail call between Thug and his girlfriend Mariah the Scientist started circulating. The call wasn't even primarily about Kodak. It was one of dozens of calls from the YSL trial period that had been circulating for months. But this one had a specific detail that stopped everything cold. On the call, Mariah tells Thug that Kodak had reached out to her while Thug was locked up. She describes being deeply infatuated with her. Those were Kodak's words, according to her. Then she reads the message out loud. It starts with well wishes for Thug, a line about thinking about him, hoping he was doing okay in there. And then it pivots. Right from that expression of solidarity into suggesting that since Thug was locked up, maybe she should consider seeing him. That pivot is the entire story. It's not clumsy flirting. Starting a message with concern for the man you're trying to step to, then using his locked-up status as the reason his girl should be available, That's calculated. That's using someone's suffering as an opening. And Mariah didn't fall for it. She rejected Kodak's advance and told Thug she said the dynamic had been like that since the very first time they met. This wasn't new behavior from him. She'd just been dealing with it and was now telling Thug everything. Thug laughed it off on the call, brushed it aside. But the internet did not brush it aside. The timeline that assembled itself in real time was devastating for Kodak. He wakes up and goes on Instagram calling out Boosie for not holding young Thug accountable. Thug had publicly offered him a blank check days earlier, extending his hand in goodwill. And then it emerges that while Thug was fighting the biggest legal battle of his life in a Fulton County cell, Kodak was in his girlfriend's inbox, using Thug's incarceration as an angle. He had no business calling out anyone's loyalty. The internet's verdict was fast, and it didn't require much argument. Kodak had positioned himself as the moral voice of hip-hop accountability for one morning, and by the afternoon he'd been exposed as the guy who slid into his peer's girlfriend's DMs while that peer was behind bars. The hypocrisy wasn't complicated. The receipts were right there. Boosie didn't even need to respond to the accountability argument anymore. The Mariah call had handled it. What makes Thug's reaction to the call interesting is the restraint of it. He laughed. He didn't explode. He didn't go on social media and address it. Part of that may be because he'd already publicly extended an olive branch to Kodak with the deal offer. Maybe he genuinely moved past it, or genuinely didn't know. Either way, his public response was to let it go. His private response was something else. Thug was navigating a relationship that had already taken hits from his own behavior. Multiple leaked calls from the trial period had him admitting to cheating on Mariah, including sleeping with someone the day before his RICO arrest. The relationship was strained before the Kodak call added to it. He issued a public apology to Mariah during this period and separately apologized to his peers for the chaos the leaked calls had created. Both apologies in the same stretch of time tell you everything about how much fire he was simultaneously trying to put out. He also went on the podcast Perspectives with Bank for 3.5 hours to address everything. 3.5 hours. That's not a press run for an album. That's a man trying to rebuild his reputation brick by brick in real time in front of an audience that had already formed its opinions. He cried talking about Gunna. He addressed the snitching allegations directly, pointed to legal filings to dispute specific claims, and insisted the interrogation audio people were circulating had been misrepresented. Whether people believed him depended almost entirely on whether they wanted to. That's the position he's still in. Thug's influence in Atlanta is real. His relationships in the industry are real, and his ability to keep building YSL despite everything is real. The label's current roster includes Strick, Tezus, Diamond, 1300 Saint, and Thug himself, with artists like Drake, Future, and Lil Baby publicly aligned but not contractually signed. That distinction, aligned but not bound, is probably the smartest position anyone in the industry can take with YSL right now. Close enough to benefit from Thug's energy, flexible enough to maintain distance from the weight the brand carries. Kodak stays independent. He stays exactly who he is, someone who can see real things clearly and then undermine the clarity with his own choices. His instinct about selective accountability in hip-hop was right. His timing was catastrophic. His credibility to make that argument collapsed the moment the Mariah call surfaced. What this whole moment actually revealed wasn't about loyalty or snitching or street codes. It was simpler than that. It was about three men, Thug rebuilding, Kodak positioning himself, Boosie playing his role, all getting caught in the same news cycle, and none of them walking away from it cleanly. Thug made the offer because he needed a win. Kodak rejected it and tried to turn it into a statement. The statement got buried under his own receipts. And Boosie, who had the most legitimate grievance in the room, spent the whole time throwing personal punches instead of making the argument that would have actually landed. The offer was made, it was declined, the calls dropped. The internet had its moment, and the story moves forward the way it always does in hip-hop, loudly, messily, and without a clean ending. Do you think Thug ever found out about the DMs before the leak? Or was he genuinely in the dark? Drop your take in the comments. Subscribe if you want every story in this culture broken down the right way.